Hi guys, I'm Helen and this is the tutorial practice video for the Mozart Sinfonia Concertante second violin part. So this music, it looks a little scary at first when you look at it, but I have faith in you guys that you can learn it and you're gonna do great. So one of the first most important things you can do when starting to learn this is listen to it. Just listen to it a bunch of times while looking at your part and watching it intently so that you know exactly how your part fits together with the solo part and with the rest of the orchestra. That's so important. So that way, even if you may not quite have all of the notes all the time, you still know how it goes and know where to come in. So another really important thing to do at the very start of learning this is to tape your pages together. So I've taped mine so that the first page is by itself because we have 2 measures of rest to turn the page here at the end. And then I have these 2 pages. And then at the end we have another 4 measures of rest to turn the page. And then the last page is also by itself. This will just make your life a whole lot easier in orchestra than having flying pages all over the place. Trust me, I've done that before. It's not fun. So another really important thing you'll want to have is a metronome for practicing this. Super, super important. And a good practice tempo that we're trying to get this up to is 100. And after this, I'm going to ask you guys to send me videos of you playing through this whole movement with the metronome set to 100 so I can see how you're doing. So, to get started with this, it is in E flat major. So we're going to want to teach our hand how to play in E flat major. So in E flat major, on the A and D strings, we have the same hand frame. So it's really helpful to teach your hand frame what that is. So we can start by tuning the first finger, E flat, on the D string. We can tune that with the G string and make sure it sounds nice and in tune, or you can just use a tuner. Once that's nice and in tune, we can add the octave E flat on the A string with your 4th finger and tune that to your 1st finger. Make sure those are nice and in tune. This will give your hand the overall frame and shape, and then you can add the other notes in between. So then we can transfer our 4th finger over back to the D string and put it on an A flat. And then we can add the 3rd finger right next to that, a half step down. We can also tune that with the G string to make sure it's in tune. And then we have the F, a whole step. It's a whole step down from the G and a whole step up from the E flat. So you can just play this a couple times. That's really, really helpful to teaching your hand how the hand frame feels for E flat major. And then for the G string, it's a little bit different. We still have a low 1st finger. We have a low 1st finger on all the strings in E flat major. So we have the A flat here, and then the B flat a whole step above, and then the C, which is also a whole step up. And then instead of a low 4th finger here, we have a high 4th finger on the D. So you'll want to tune this with the open D string and make sure it sounds the same. the G string can be a little tricky because all your fingers are a whole step apart. So I would just go up and down a lot of times and teach your hand how this feels. It feels kind of stretchy, so it's good to practice it a little more. Okay, now on the E string, we have also a low first finger. And then the G is a whole step up from that. And then this time we have a low third finger, a half step away from the second finger. And then we have a low fourth finger. We have a low fourth finger on the upper three strings, but this one is a whole step away from the third finger because the third finger was also low. So. So it can be helpful to just go through all the strings like this. Okay, so that's your hand frame for first position for E flat major. Now that we've learned that, let's get to learning the piece. Before we get into the music too much, I just want to give you guys a few more practice tips that'll be really helpful for learning this. So the first one is don't just play it all the way through all the time. I know it might be tempting to do that, but it's way more helpful and way more efficient if you just really focus on the spots that are giving you trouble and isolate them one at a time, and practice them slowly at first to get the notes. But then, especially for the parts that are going to go fast, practicing them slowly won't actually teach you how to play them quickly. So instead of just practicing them slowly, you'll want to practice them in shorter increments, in little fast bursts. And I'll give you an example of that later when we get to one of the fast parts. Another really important, helpful thing to do is to notice patterns. So anything that repeats and comes back later in the piece, you can notice that, you can mark it, and you can use the same practice strategies as when it was earlier in the piece. Or if it's exactly the same, then you don't have to practice it at all because you've already learned it. So not playing all the way through, isolating things, playing them slowly, and then playing them in fast, shorter bursts, and then also noticing patterns. Those are some really important practice tips for this piece. So the first tricky part is in the beginning at measure 3, and when I originally put fingerings into this part, I put a 2 and a 1, but I want you guys to change that. I want you guys to put a 1 on the B flat and a 4 on the E flat. So this is going to be in second position, and this is going to make it a whole lot easier for your right hand. Instead of having to do all those string crossings, you can just stay on the G string the whole time. So to get into second position, you can start in first position on the first finger A to give yourself a reference point. Tune that with the D string to make sure it's in tune. And then you can just slide your whole hand up a half step, making sure to slide your whole forearm as a unit instead of going like this. Don't want to do any of that funny business. Slide it up to the B flat. And that's going to be your anchor point for second position. So then with your first finger B flat, you can tune your fourth finger B flat, that's an octave up on the D string. Once that's nice and in tune, you can transfer your fourth finger over back to the G string to the E flat. Notice this is pretty much exactly the same thing we were doing with the first position hand frame. So here we go, already using a practice strategy more than once. And then we can add the D, that's a half step away. And then the C is a whole step down. Then back down to the B flat. So now you have all 4 of the notes in second position. So the first pattern of 16th notes in measure 3 goes like this. It's an open G, first finger B flat, fourth finger E flat. And then it's just this repeated over and over again for 2 measures. So you can just practice this slowly at first to get your hand used to it, and then you can speed it up a little and practice it in short little bursts. Like you can do 4 notes at a time, and then another 4. And just repeat that as many times as you need to make it feel comfortable. And then once you're comfortable with that, you can double it and do 8 notes at a time and go. And then repeat that as many times as you need, and then you can make it a whole measure. And then our next pattern we have is back down in first position on a low first finger A flat, is the first note. Then we have a B flat, a whole step up from that, and we have a high fourth finger D. So this one is a little stretchy, for me at least. You might have to kind of rock your hand forward a little bit to be able to reach that D. And then we go back to the second position, back to the first pattern. So you'll also want to practice shifting your hand between these positions. So you can do this by starting on the first finger A flat, and then shifting up to a first finger B flat. And just getting your hand used to that motion. And then to practice switching between those quickly, you can just take the first 4 notes from each of the patterns. So that would be and then you can just practice going between them. First do it with 4 notes at a time with a little break between them. And then you can slowly try to get rid of the break. This will train your hand to go between those 2 finger positions, which is going to be really helpful. So we also have some dynamic changes in this part. So as you can see, all the first patterns in the second position are always piano, and then all the second patterns in first position are always forte. So to do this, you can use less bow and further away from the bridge, closer to the fingerboard for the piano passages. And then once you switch to the other ones, you can put your bow closer to the bridge and use more bow and more arm weight also. Okay, so the next tricky part we're going to work on is at letter A, which is also measure 27. And so these 16th notes can look a little scary at first, but once we break them down, they're not as scary as they seem. So the first one, we're just going to break it down by the notes that are in the measure. So the first measure at A is an open G, and then second finger B flat, and then first finger E flat, and then third finger G. And then the second measure is second finger B flat, open D, second finger F, first finger B flat, and then the third measure is first finger E flat, third finger G, second finger C, and fourth finger E flat. So next we'll want to go through all of them. Don't play the 16th notes, only play just one note at a time, just one bow per note change. So we'll just want to go through slowly one measure at a time. Let's just choose the first measure at A. And then we can also do this backwards. So it's really just those 4 notes, and then we'll eventually add the 16th notes back in, but not yet. And so the next measure, we'll do the same thing, starting on the B flat. And then go backwards too. And then same thing with the last measure. And then you can do all 3 measures like that in a row. And if you're asking, why are we going backwards, Helen? Why is that helpful? Well, it's the hand frame again. It teaches your hand frame to be in that position, and then going backwards also challenges your brain a little bit, and it really just cements that in your brain and in your fingers. So next we can add the actual pattern that the notes are played in. Still no 16th notes yet though. And then second measure. And then third measure. And then you can just isolate the individual measures and do them over and over again. Just repeat it so it's really in your hand. And then you can also speed it up slowly. And then once you're comfortable with that, we can add the 16th notes back in. And just do one measure at a time and give yourself a break between them. Let me put on my metronome and see what 100 sounds like. So this is 100. This is going to be our goal practice tempo. So I'm just going to play it through with the metronome without the 16th notes at first. So I was giving myself a break between each measure to let myself kind of regroup and put my fingers in the next position. And then you can do this a bunch of times, and once you're ready, you can do it with 16th notes at 100. And again, you can start by giving yourself a break between each measure. And then once you're comfortable with this, you can put it all together. So now we're going to talk about the 16th note bow stroke that you'll use whenever you have those repeated 16th notes throughout this movement. So just like the part we worked on at A, we have those repeated 16th notes. And the bow stroke you'll want to use with these, it sounds bouncy, but it's not really bouncing. So you'll want to, let's just try it on an open D string. And you want to be about in the middle of the bow, and you don't want to use too much bow, but you want to use a lot of energy for it. See, if we were to use too much bow, then it would sound kind of wishy-washy and have those extra things in it. So if you just keep it a nice short bow stroke, just with a lot of energy. Then it kind of sounds like my bow is jumping, but really I'm not actually trying to make it bounce at all. If you looked at it in slow motion, it might be coming off the string just a tiny bit, but that's not something I'm trying to do. It just sounds like it is. So it's a good idea to practice this stroke a lot just on open strings and really experiment, making sure you have a nice relaxed bow hand and you're not locking up in your arm. And just experiment with what feels the best and what's the best way for you to have that nice short bow stroke with a lot of energy. And this will help you throughout all the 16th note passages in this movement. The next tricky part we'll want to look at is the part in measure 50 with all the trills. So to start working on this, we'll want to just isolate the long notes, so the dotted quarter notes, and then we'll just want to teach our hand where the whole steps and half steps are, and there's a lot of sliding between them. So let's just go slowly through all of them, and also let's mark where all the whole steps and half steps are in our music. So we'll start in measure 50 on the first long note, which is a B natural on the G string with a second finger. And then we slide our second finger up a half step to the C. And then we slide it a whole step up to the D natural. And then we play a third finger, E flat, right next to it. And then we'll shift down to first position on the D string for an E natural this time. And then second finger, F natural, a half step away from that. And then we slide our finger up to an F sharp. Third finger G right next to it. And then here we shift up into second position for the G. So you can just practice shifting between those two positions from the third finger G, sliding your whole hand up as a unit to the second finger G, You can just go slowly between those. And then after the G, we slide up to a second finger A flat, and then second finger A natural, half step up, and then we go down to first position to a first finger B flat on the A string, and then slide that up to a B natural with a first finger, and then that's all the low notes in that passage. So when you're sliding your fingers up, it's really important that you don't rock them on your fingertip. You just slide it as a unit. And it's easier to slide if you're kind of playing more on the pad of your finger versus really straight up and down. If you're really straight up and down, then it's harder to slide because there's less surface area. If you're more on the pad, then it's softer and easier. So let's just go through those notes one more time, the long notes only. And feel free to play along with me here. It's also helpful to do the correct bowing every time, especially the upbows that are circled. Those are the tricky ones. So then after you're comfortable with just playing the long notes, we can add the 16th notes, but still no trills. So the first one goes down to a first finger A, and then we slide up to the next one, and then the next one, so for these, it's also extremely helpful to write in where the whole steps and half steps are, because they're not always the same. So the first one, there's a whole step between the B and the A. So I would write that in. And then the next one, there's a half step between the C and the B natural. And then a whole step again. So just go slowly through all of those and mark where the whole steps and half steps are. And then once you're comfortable with that, we can add in the trills. And again, you can mark which ones are whole steps and which ones are half steps. So the first one, the B and the C, is a half step. And for this, you can just do 2 trills on each note. That's enough for each one. So let's do them really slowly. So it's also helpful to stop between each one. So the first one with 2 trills, and then stop at the tip of the bow and move your whole hand up. Make sure you're all ready and in position. Think about where the whole steps and half steps are, and then play the next one. And then repeat that again. Slide your hand up. So just go slowly through all of them. So that's how you can practice that trill passage. So next we're going to talk about the syncopated rhythms, which is wherever you're playing on the offbeats. So one place where this is from measures 58 to 65. And a good way to practice this is using the metronome. So you can put your metronome at 100, like we were doing before, and then you can just practice it on an open string, like on the D string. think 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and in your head. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So what helps me is kind of tapping my foot a little bit on the on beats and then playing on the off beats, on the ands. So 1 and. It can also be helpful to actually say it out loud while you're playing. I know it might feel silly, but it's really helpful. So I'll demonstrate that. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So this way you can really make sure you're only changing bows on the ands. So let's put that into practice. Let's start at measure 58 and play that through with the metronome. One and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So especially those last 3 measures are a little bit more tricky because you're changing away from the pattern. So you can just practice the notes by themselves first to make sure you are really comfortable with them. And then once you're comfortable with the notes, you can put the metronome on and play them on the off beats. Now we're going to talk about the bow stroke we have repeated a lot of times in this movement. So when we have a bunch of upbows on eighth notes. So one of these starts at measure 72, and so we just have a whole measure of upbows. So to practice this light bow stroke, you can start on an open string, just the D string, let's say. And you're going to be about between the middle and the balance point, and it's going to almost feel like someone's pushing your elbow really fast, but then you let your arm fall back into place. And you want to keep your wrist and your hand relaxed, but pretty steady here, because you don't want it to be coming too much from the wrist, or else there will be a lot of extra stuff in there. So we can do this in slow motion, just on an open D, starting on the string, and here, I'll even push my own elbow to try to see what it feels like. You guys can also try this. So just starting in the middle of the bow and pushing your elbow really fast, and then letting your hand fall back to its original position. So as you can see, this motion is actually coming from my shoulder. So the whole arm is kind of staying pretty much in the same position, because it's not a big motion either. It's just a little up, up. We want to make sure we come back to the first part of the bow pretty fast. So that way we can repeat it as many times as we want. So let's just try that on with the metronome again, set to 100. Let's just try that for a bit on the D string. You can just do every other beat and give yourself a beat to set your bow back on the string, get yourself in position, and play again. So let's try that first, actually. So we're just playing every other beat. 1, 2, ready, go. Set, 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 set. And then we can move it to every beat. 1, 2, 3, 4. And now we can try to add the notes. So starting at measure 72 on the last beat with that A flat. And then just keep practicing that. And then again, you can practice setting your bow between each one. And then speed it up until you're comfortable with playing it at tempo. So this comes back several times throughout this movement, so it's really important that you get comfortable with that light up bow stroke. Alright, now I'm going to tell you how you can work on the fast parts in this. So let's go to measure 158 where it says tutti and we have all the 16th notes. So for this, first you're going to want to just go through it slowly and teach yourself the notes. And you can also mark extra accidentals in your part. So for example, in measure 159 we have an A natural and then it's repeated, but it doesn't say A natural the second time, so you might want to mark A natural in throughout the rest of the measure just to make sure you remember to play all those A naturals. So to work on the fast part, we can isolate little parts of it and work them up to speed. Let's go to measure 158 and set our metronome at 100, and we'll just play bursts of 5 notes. So the first 5 notes, the B flat, so we'll just play those in a row quickly and then stop. And then we'll play the next 5 notes. And then the next 5. And between each one, you'll want to give yourself time to reset your hand and make sure you know what you're playing next. And then the last 5 of the measure. And then you can also do each one backwards to make sure your hand is really comfortable with it and to challenge your brain a little bit. So with the first one at measure 158, that would sound like this. And then the second one. And then you can just go through this whole 16th note passage and play them only 5 notes in a row and do it backwards and just make sure your hand is really comfortable with each one. And now we can put on our metronome and we can play those little 5 note bursts and give ourselves a break between each of them before we go on. So I'm going to give myself 1 beat of a break between each burst of 5 notes. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And then if you mess up, you can just repeat 1 over and over again until you're comfortable with it. And then go on. Oops, I messed up. Let's do that again. And then a good rule whenever you mess up little things like that, I like to try to do it 3 times in a row perfectly. If I do it once in a row, it could be an accident, but if I do it 3 times in a row perfectly, then I know I've really got it. So you can just go, I'm not going to go through that whole passage like that, but you can feel free to pause the video and go through the whole passage with those little 5 note bursts until you're comfortable with it. And then once you've done that, we can double it and make it 8 notes, or actually 8 plus the first one of the next, so 9 notes. So that'll sound like this. So let's try that with the metronome. And again, you can give yourself 1 beat of a break between each burst. passage with those 8 or 9 note bursts until you're really comfortable with it. And then finally, we can make it into a whole measure. This is the fun part. Let's see if I can do it. See, that one was a little trickier. This is why you've got to practice it a lot beforehand. So once you're really comfortable with the 8 note bursts and the whole measure bursts, then you can try the whole thing at tempo. Another fast part we can practice using that same strategy is the 16th note passage starting at measure 328. So I'll just put on my metronome at 100 and give you a little example of how to practice that. I'll just do the first 2 measures. So first we're going to do the 5 note bursts and stopping for a beat between each one. One, two, three, four. So you'll repeat that until you're really comfortable with that and can do it in your sleep. And then now we're going to do the 8 note bursts. One, two, three, four. Oops, messed that up. Now that I did it 3 times in a row perfectly, I can go on to the next one. Alright. And after that, you can do the full measures and go through the whole 16th note passage, practicing it like that. Another part that has some tricky notes in it is measure 323. We have an E flat minor passage with a lot of low third fingers. So let's start in 323 on the first finger E flat. And then we have a low G flat, which we haven't had before in this. And then we have a low C flat as well. And it's right across from the G flat. So it's the same distance away, just across a string. And then we have second finger B flat. And then we have an A natural. And I'm playing that with a 2 so that you can just keep your first finger on the E flat the whole time. So that's an interval of a tritone away from each other, and your fingers are right next to each other, just your second finger is on the G string. So if this is tricky for you, you can play the E flat on the D string, first finger, and then play the E natural with the second finger right next to it, and then just move your finger straight over, right across to the G string, to the A natural, while keeping your first finger on the E flat. And there you go, there you have the tritone interval. So it's not actually that tricky if you just think about staying in the same hand position and keeping your E flat down at all times. So slowly, it's low third finger, low second finger, so if you just focus on keeping your hand in the same hand frame, then that'll make it a lot easier to get all those notes. So the next tricky part we're going to look at is measures 336 and 337 with the weird notes and string crossings. So let's just focus on the notes first. So we have an E flat on the the A string, fourth finger, and then we have a low third finger G flat on the D string. Make sure those are a whole step apart, just on different strings. And then we have a high first finger on the A on the G string. So starting with the E flat, just find all those three notes and keep all your fingers down at the same time. And these are the only three notes we have in those measures. So if you just keep your fingers down throughout all those measures, then you don't have to think about what your left hand is doing, and you can just focus on your string crossings. So for the string crossings, they can be a little tricky, but it's easier if you isolate each of them. So going from the E flat to the G flat, let's play the E flat and then cross your string, set your bow where it's going to be for the G flat, and then play. And then let's do the same thing for the A, set your bow on the string. So let's just go through that measure slowly, and every time you have a string crossing, without playing, cross your bow to the next string, set it in place, make sure you know where it goes, and then play. So let's just go through measure 336 slowly like that. Actually, let's do this on open strings. So if we're doing it on open strings, let's just start on the open A string and cross to the D string, setting before you play every time. And then we cross down to the G string, set, make sure you know where it is, play. And then D, A, so the pattern for all these measures, starting in the second half of measure 36, is G, D, A, D, A, D, A, D. So you can just practice this pattern on open strings a bunch of times and speed it up until you're more comfortable with it before adding the left hand back in. We can also focus on what our right elbow is doing. So on the G string, you'll notice it's the highest, and then on the D string, it goes down, and then on the A string, it's lowest. So every time you're setting between string crossings, make sure your elbow is moving to the correct position. And now let's speed it up a little bit. So if you were watching me in slow motion, you'd probably see that my elbow is actually moving, like it's getting ready just a little bit before I do the string crossing. So if you think in your head about where is my elbow supposed to go for the next string crossing, then that'll be really helpful, even when you're playing it faster. And now we can add the notes back in. So the low third and fourth fingers and the high first finger. Oh, and I misspoke. The second part of the last measure, of measure 337, is actually a little different. So it goes... So we can just practice that on open strings again. So it's G, D, A, D, G, D, D, D. that a bunch of times until you could do it in your sleep. And then we can add the notes back in with the left hand. Anytime you have string crossings like this, it's always really helpful, especially for me. I love to practice on open strings to get the string crossings. So this is something you can use in other parts of this and in the rest of your practicing. The last tricky part we're going to talk about is in measure 378, where we have the 16th notes and 32nd notes. And it looks kind of scary, but it's not as scary as it looks. So first, let's just play the longer notes. So at the start of 378, we have the dotted quarter, E flat, and then the next one is the G after the two 16th notes. And then we're going to shift up to third position, and we have a B flat, third finger in third position. And then we shift back down to first position for a fourth finger E flat. So let's just do those notes again. And do it backwards too. And now we can add in the faster notes. So E flat, and then we have 1, 2, 3, and then we shift up to third position, and we do this so we can do the 1, 2, 3 without having to do a really fast string crossing, because that would just be kind of clumsy and hard. So we're shifting up to third position, and we have a 1, 2, 3, and then back down to first position, 1, 2, 3, 4. So let's just do each of them slowly and stop between each one. So E flat, and then we can speed it up a little bit. And you can just do this and set your bow and fingers between each one. Alright, that's it for the Mozart video. I really hope this has been helpful for you guys and given you some good strategies to start practicing this. I know this is a bit of a longer video, a lot longer than the Vivaldi ones, but there's just a lot more to learn and it's really exciting. So I'm excited to see how you guys do in your practice videos. Those are just going to be you playing through the whole movement of the Mozart with the metronome set to 100 so I can see how you're doing and give you some feedback. Alright, let me know if you have any other questions. You can email me or text me and I will respond as soon as possible. Alright, thanks. Happy practicing. Bye.